keeled over. He'd have to bring it back upright somehow and then pull it out of the stream. For a moment he couldn't think how to get it upright. He moved into the stream again. He was getting sick of taking his boots off and putting them back on, and heaved on the wagon, but it didn't move. The sand and gravel bottom seemed to suck it down, and even when he used a heavy tree limb the flood had brought down for a lever, the wagon didn't budge. He moved to the bank again, let the sun dry his feet, and studied the wagon. If he could move it sideways, pull it from the side... He saw the answer. He could use Speck and Spud to pull it back on its wheels from the side. He went into the willows. The harnesses were damp, but had dried enough to stiffen slightly, and he worked them with his hands to loosen them a bit. The collars were still soaked, but they would work. He caught Speck. Spud was already on a long picket, and harnessed them. Speck jumped around a bit until she remembered she'd worn the harness to pull the wagon for 3 days. Spud just looked around at the straps and chains and seemed to shrug. How to hook them to the side of the wagon was the hard part. The tongue and doubletree were still attached to the front of the wagon, and John went back into the stream and looked at them. The doubletree, the crosspiece the horses actually pulled on, was held to the tongue and wagon by a single drop pin. It was wedged in, but he used a rock from the stream bottom and pounded it out. This gave him the doubletree and the 2 single trees to use to hook to the horses. He brought their trace chains back to the hooks on the doubletree, and hooked the 2 horses up without a tongue between them, and left the doubletree lying on the ground. The horses had been cow-pony trained to stand any time their reins were left to hang, and they waited, swishing their tails to keep the flies moving. John uncoiled his lariat and threw the end over the top of the wagon. On the backside he pulled the rope down and tied it through a hole in the boards on the side of the wagon. The boards were bolted in place and strong, but time had opened small holes here and there as they shrunk or worked at each other, and he found a hole just big enough for the rope end. With the rope over the wagon and tied to the side, it ended just at the shoreline. He picked up the doubletree and pulled backward on it. Back, back. He tried to make his voice low, the way his father's voice would sound. The horses seemed to respond better to a low voice, or maybe just to his father's voice. Spud and Speck backed in tiny little steps, fidgeting at the chains hanging by their legs as they worked backward. He let them make their own way, pulling and saying back, back in the low voice, until at last they had come far enough. The hole through the middle of the doubletree was just over the rope, and he pushed the end through and tied it. "There," he said, standing. "Now we snort and go." He went to the front of the horses and brought them forward slowly until the rope was snug, hanging in the air from the wagon up to the doubletree. He'd seen his father use a team of horses once when he was very small to pull some tree roots out of the ground, and he remembered it now. His father had stood off to the side of the team a bit, not in front and not behind where he could get caught by the end of the chain. In John's case, the rope, if the pull snapped it. John moved to the side, held Speck's bridle strap in his hand, and clicked with his tongue. "Come on, pick it up." The 2 horses pulled against the rope, took it tighter and tighter until it seemed to pull them backward. But the wagon didn't move. "It's supposed to come up," John mumbled. "Just come right up." He clicked his tongue again, pulled on Speck's bridle, and the rope grew tighter still, almost hummed. And the wagon still didn't move. "Well, all right." He moved to the rear of Speck and slapped her on the rump. It was nearly the last thing he did on earth. The slap wasn't hard, but it frightened and startled Speck. She lunged forward, offsetting the doubletree, jerking it sideways. The trace chains flipped into Spud's legs, and he lunged forward. His sudden movement worsened Speck's fright, and in half a second the 2 of them were nearly crazy, slamming against their harnesses, heaving, driving their back feet into the ground, pulling in an instant jerk that put over a ton of weight on the rope. Everything happened at once. There was a great sucking sound, and the wagon came up, jumped up off its side upright. But even that didn't release enough of the pressure. The horses were still jerking, lunging forward, and all the force of their pull came down to the one small board the rope was tied to on the wagon. It gave, almost in the same split second as the wagon...